So welcome everybody, and welcome from all at the Sutton Coldfield Chamber of Commerce. It's great to virtually see so many people with us here today for a special Q&A with Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. Andy, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chris. Great to be here. I'm sorry we're not here in person. Last time we did it was up, I can't remember by Butler's Lane.
Aston Wood, wasn't it? Aston Wood Golf Club, yeah.
Yeah. So
slightly different world, but it's great to see you. Wonderful. Yes, thank you, Andy. And we also have Phil Arkinstall, our Sutton Coldfield Chamber President, who will be looking after the Q&A with Andy after his presentation. Following the end of the event at around 2:50 p.m, as Andy scoots off to his next call, we'll be inviting all of the delegates on the call to join a separate Zoom call where we'll sort of do some networking, some comments, some discussions around those areas brought up by Andy in his presentation, the Q&As afterwards. So please do join us for that at around 2:53 p.m. Few quick housekeeping rules from our side. As Andy is speaking, please do add questions into the Q&A box, which Phil can use to ask after the presentation. And as I can see from already, the chat box is live and kicking, which is great. So please do feedback, give us your thoughts, and engage through the chat box as well. So yeah, once again, a big welcome, and I will now pass over to Andy Street for his presentation, and we'll go for questions after that. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. And I think Jess is just going to put the presentation up. Oh, gosh, you've got it all linked, Jess. It's there. It is. Just put it on full screen, Jess. Lovely. Okay. And Jess is going to be my human clicker. So you will have me saying, click on to the next slide. Anyway, I've done a little presentation, which I think will get us going before then Phil chairs the Q&A, and obviously any subject you want there at all. So let's click it on then. I've put Sutton Coldfield and the West Midlands recovery. There are three bits I wanted to cover in it, three parts. Before the pandemic, how were we doing? And the purpose of doing that is to think, what can we learn from what was happening before about what's going to propel us forward afterwards? Then we'll be pretty brutal on what the impact has been, and then the plan for recovery, of course. So let's go on again, Jess. So before the pandemic hit, well, I know there were still some huge challenges for our region. No one's denying that. But basically, we'd had a pretty good period, as the graph here shows. Total employment in the West Midlands actually at a record high, both in terms of numbers of people and actually in terms of the rate of employment, 75.2. So 97,000 jobs created over 3 years. Remember that number, 97,000, for a reason that's going to become clear a little later. And then if we go on again, Jess, if you look at one or two of the underlying features behind our economy, we were improving our qualification level in the workforce. Really important. This is a very important determinant of long-term success, and it's quite a dramatic continuous line there. So really encouraging. And click on again. And we were building more homes, because we know there's nothing that drives the economy faster than home building. And so actually really pleased, over a 5-6 year period, we'd actually doubled the number of homes from less than 8,000 to more than 16,000. And we were on target, that's the line in the middle, on target for what we had to achieve for our regional output. Helped, Jess, on again, helped by the money that we brought in from central government, which leads to pictures like this. This is out at Portloop in Ladywood, where we'd actually got over 400 million for Brownfield development and this wonderful modular construction piece going on there. But lots of developments, not necessarily modular construction, but on brownfield sites across the West Midlands. And then next one, in terms of Sutton, this was, as your MP is instructing me back in 2017, was taking the pressure off your Greenbelt. This was at the time where Andrew was campaigning around saving the Greenbelt on the Warmley side of town. Obviously, not through Andrew's fault in any way, but that campaign was not successful. And I really learnt then the criticality of making sure we defend our Greenbelt going forward, particularly important around Sutton. And we were doing it through that brownfield redevelopment. The other big story, of course, on again, Jess, before pandemic, was our consistent investment in transport. I chose a network, the Metro network, obviously the small extension past Town Hall, out along to Edgbaston, up through the Black Country, Wolverhampton, and on the left-hand side, the new digging that started in the pandemic, actually for the east side extension down into Digbeth. And then away from Metro, other parts of transport. Click on again, Jess. other transport rebuilding stations in Coventry, in Wolverhampton, the 2 images, and actually the Wolverhampton one is very, very nearly finished now. It actually opens formally this week, which is brilliant, and will allow a full interchange with metro, bus, and of course cycle hire there as well. And then, of course, the hot news was just last week, we got the money from the government for the reopening of new railway lines. But as just as anticipated, the move on, existing line, of course, the Sutton line, the cross-city line, the brilliant news that the rolling stock, brand new rolling stock, state of the art, this is now being tested on the line, all having been built in the factories in Derby and will be deployed before the end of this year. And it is 40% more capacity than the previous rolling stock. They are truly beautiful trains, wonderful investment for Sutton there. And of course, bringing us right up to date, the last part of, again, Jess, the last part of the transport story pre-pandemic was just before the lockdown. We had Boris here for the announcement of HS2 works starting. And we know that so much falls off the back of that, particularly jobs for our local companies. And then click on again. Of course, what we also have is a clean bus fleet, an absolute commitment to that. They're beautiful, state-of-the-art buses there. We had the Prime Minister here again yesterday in Coventry to celebrate all of that, as you might have seen, and literally right up to date. Click the launch of the cycle hire scheme there with the leader of the town council in Sutton just a few weeks ago. And thanks to Sutton for trialling that for us. Great success, and we will now roll out across the conurbation. Add all that lot up together, what was happening, if you click on again, Jess, you will see that young Londoners were actually voting with their feet, choosing to come and make the West Midlands their home. In the year pre-pandemic, a really dramatic graph here, number of young Londoners coming to the West Midlands as opposed to the next big regional areas, Manchester, Leeds and Bristol. And you see our dominance there. And then last slide in this section, Jess, it led us to this sort of talk that the 2020s were to be the West Midlands decade. 12 months ago, I remember meeting in Centenary Square for the unveiling of the Commonwealth Games clock. That was exactly 12 months ago. And there was this incredible feeling of optimism around. But sadly, that has been somewhat punctured. If we go on to the next slide, the impact of COVID, let's have a look at what it's done. And indeed, next one as well, Jess, that's it, you've anticipated it. So, sorry, the headline is spot on. The West Midlands economy amongst the regions hardest hit by the lockdown. And, you know, the image of Grand Central says it all, doesn't it? The desertion of our city centres and town centres. Why the hardest hit? On again, Jess? Because of the makeup of our economy. It's nothing to do with the health issues here. It's purely a sectoral issue. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Some of the sectors in which we are really strong, business tourism, if you just think about it, where do you go for a business conference? You come here. 50% market share we have, totally closed for a year. And manufacturing, where is the strongest manufacturing region in the country? Here. What's been set back? Take something like aerospace, just almost totally destroyed. And actually a real strength, our higher education sector, particularly in Coventry, actually, for this one. Again, very much pushed back. So the consequence of all of that, Jess, next slide, is that we believe that we will see 100,000 more people out of work as a consequence of COVID. So remember, I said at the beginning, in 3 years, we'd created 97,000 more jobs. This is what we're heading to. So it's pretty simple and stark. All the progress we made in 3 years knocked back in 1. Of course, they're different jobs. Of course, some of the new jobs are going to be there for the future. But the simple maths is we've lost all that we progressed. And particularly, next slide, Jess, the challenge is very hard for our young people. 41,000 of that group, 9% of that age group. So young, particularly women, and particularly from disadvantaged communities. The pandemic has been uneven in its economic impact as it was in its health impact. And we know that there are some particular issues, if you go on to the next slide, frankly, whether it be in Sutton Coldfield or central London, the impact on our towns and city centres is very stark as well, and those economies, and I'm sure with questions around that. But there is some room for optimism. These slides, just to explain this, this is from central government, this slide, and the Chancellor used this in his budget presentation, showing what the expectation of unemployment was against where we now think it's going to turn out. Blue lines being the expectation at the end of last year, the light blue lines being the expectation in March. And basically, because of the business support that has been there, it looks as though the impact is going to be less stark. But obviously, the beady-eyed will see that that slide implies that we will continue to see unemployment rising this year before peaking next year. So there's some optimism, and of course the other optimism comes from the vaccination dosage. This is the number for vaccinations just in the Midlands, and actually if you look at the Birmingham and Solihull CCG area, which Sutton is part of, actually the take-up is really encouraging, and the take-up in the Sutton wards is quite remarkable actually. I think over 95% in most Sutton wards for the elder age groups who've been offered for some weeks now. So and that does give us such confidence going forward. So onward then, Jess. So the simple message, if you can just, next slide. Yeah, lovely. So the simple message is obviously we were doing really well. We've had this horrible hit, but what are we going to do to recover? So probably the first important point to draw out is we've got a plan. In this situation, you can't just have fantasy and you can't just have hope. You've got to have a firm plan. So we did last summer this critical plan that we called Recharge the West Midlands, talking about particular schemes that we were looking for investment in. And the good news is that since we did this proposal last summer, we've had about £650 million of government investment behind things here, as well as some private sector investment that I will come on to. But really clear, we know where we want the investment in the transformational sectors. We also have a plan on, again, Jess, we have a plan for jobs. We launched this just 2 weeks ago. This is a mayoral plan, to be clear. It's my plan for getting the West Midlands back into work. And it talks about the different ingredients of what we are going to do. It's very clear. It's aiming at 100,000. You can see why. Clearly, we want to do more than that as the economy underlying improves. But these are the things we can see right now. We'll deliver in the next 2 years. Doesn't need new funding that we haven't got. It is all available to us now on the back of actions that are happening. And I want just to take you through the ingredients of that plan, basically. So let's have another slide on, Jess. So the first ingredient, of course, in any recovery, you've got to protect what you already have. And if we can get the sectors that have been hardest hit to bounce back, that will obviously restore jobs. And the best example of that, of course, is hospitality. More jobs lost in hospitality than anything else. And our target is restoring 7,000 jobs in that sector with the consumer bounce back. And of course, I prepared this before we knew the budget, the hope that the Chancellor would put further support there for the that sector, which he did do, and frankly, more than I expected. Second slide, yes, is to make the most of our big wins. Now, there's a really important point here. Between 17 and 19, we had some really big competition wins. And as a consequence, there can now be jobs coming from them. And the biggest win of all was, of course, HS2. Some of you might have been against it, but the truth is it's happening. And obviously, it will generate jobs. Already 12,000 jobs, and we're looking for 5,000 more in the next 2 years just for the West Midlands. And bringing us right up to speed, the image is of the development around the HS2 interchange station in Solihull, where we got in the budget £50 million to sort of pump prime that to start the redevelopment. And anyone can see it is just the best connected place in Britain, and it can be a wonderful driver of growth across the West Midlands. So huge opportunity there. Next slide. Then, of course, there are the opportunities from our big two events, and we are extremely fortunate. We had to bid for them, won it, to have these two opportunities in our recovery. And the Commonwealth Games we'll talk more about, as we, of course, Suttonians don't agree there in Birmingham, but I will say, as we're in Birmingham today, and of course, there, we're after at least 6,000 jobs from the Commonwealth Games. People talk of many, many more, but my modesty said just 6,000. And we were just talking yesterday to some people who are being retrained on the back of the Jobs and Skills Academy for the Commonwealth Games. So really big opportunity there as well. Third slide, a third ingredient is, of course, double down on what's going well. This is where the lessons of what was happening pre-pandemic come for our recovery. And the sector that was growing fastest in the West Midlands was construction. The images of the new wonderful facility in Wolverhampton, the National Brownfield Institute, where we want to get the brains of how we regenerate land. And then the pods, as we talked about, being delivered there on the right-hand side, cutting edge of construction. But such an opportunity there. And then, of course, within construction, for next slide, we should talk a bit about Sutton, because part of that is, of course, the master plan for Sutton. We've worked together with the town council, really brilliant master plan, frankly, which protects the character but reinvests. And there will be investment and jobs on the back of that in Sutton as well. And we actually saw, if we go on again, brilliant news in the last budget, £100 million from the Chancellor for regenerating towns and cities across the West Midlands. Rowley, Smethwick, Wolverhampton, West Brom, all in the Black Country. But that's a hell of a lot of money to be won for the West Midlands. And Sandwell as a borough got more than anywhere else in the country. Next area where we've got to double down on what's going well is, of course, our investment in transport. And just a couple of examples. The budget also gave us the money for Darlaston, for Willenhall, for Moseley, for Camp Hill, and that too is jobs. We reckon there's about 1,200 jobs just creating our own transport investments across the West Midlands. That alone, the jobs that come on the back of better connectivity. But we've hardly started on our transport plan. Onward again. Of course, we have our vision for what we want our transport plan to be. And the great thing about this map is we've got increasingly colouring it in with what we want to do. And you see, of course, on the plan there, that wonderful, exciting line, the Sutton Park line, from Aldridge round through Sutton, back into town through Castle Brom. So there we go. And that, of course, is the next slide. This wonderful image of Sutton Park Station in the 1960s, when it was reopened. It won't give us jobs in the next 2 years before anyone thinks I'm drunk, but this will be an important, really important investment in transport in Sutton. I mean, it's a dream, really, but evidence is we can make other lines happen. This is the target for the next mayoral term. And the next slide, I don't really know about this. This is the image of the interchange that we will be doing in the middle of Sutton. I think if we manage to build something like that, I will be very surprised. I'm sure Suttonians and the planners will have their view, but early thoughts of what could go on to the Brassington Way land, which, as we know, has been vacant for years and years as a state-of-the-art transport interchange just outside what currently is the back entrance to Sutton Station. So next then, let's move away from those to the next big idea in the ingredients. We've got to play to the things we are really brilliant at and get behind them, because this is where the jobs will come. And I've chosen here the image of 5G, the new technology, and we know that we are the leading region in the country on this. Just had the data, says Birmingham is twice as well connected as London, 3 times as well connected as Manchester in this, a competition we had to win a few years ago. And I've chosen the Ricoh image from Coventry, because that's where Vodafone have their 5G demonstrator thing. Brilliant business opportunities through 5G. And then to a sector that I also think will become onward. Oh, sorry, I think you've gone. My apologies, I've got the slides out of order. This other sector, of course, where we have real strength are, of course, the automotive sector. And this is the image, again, incredibly ambitious, of what we want to do around the Gigafactory here. That's the electric battery factory. And we've announced our site in the south of Coventry. And now we're about wooing an international investor, the government already having put cash on the table to subsidise this. Incredibly exciting for the future of the West Midlands. 4,000 jobs alone from this factory. Onwards. And then 2 other sectors, which I think are really important, actually. Creative industries. So important. The image there with Stephen Knight, who will be producing his film studio in Digbeth. And watch this space. Later this week, you may even see some announcements of other investment from a certain organisation that broadcasts the news at 10, for which Birmingham has been waiting for good news for many, many years. So fingers crossed for this one. And then the last sector I wanted, of course, to call on was health and life sciences. Again, no pipe dream this. This is the £200 million investment in the Life Sciences Park in South Birmingham at Selly Oak. Diggers in the ground, QE Hospital in the background, and the private sector's investors here not politicians, talk of 10,000 jobs in this sector over the next few years. We've just counted 1,000 in the first 2 years, but so exciting, this piece as well. All onward, Jess, also in the context of building back better. So the fifth ingredient is the sectors where we've got to do better because we want to be different to the pre-pandemic. And of course, this whole point about net zero is absolutely critical to this. Now, that could be about the gigafactory and electrification of automotive, or it could be about, onward, Jess, next slide, rather more simple pieces, whether it be about cycling provision, 17 million there since the beginning of COVID, or onward again, of course, about the Starley Network, our network of cycle tracks across the West Midlands, which we similarly are beginning to be coloured in there. And as we said earlier on, next slide, we've just added it in, the wonderful cycle hire launch recently in Wolverhampton to complement Sutton. It is Coventry's turn next, all boroughs by July. And of course, part of this building back better, next slide, is also the natural environment. So here we are in Solihull launching our virtual forest this time last year. And over that time, 16,600 trees planted. It could just be someone doing it in their back garden and putting it on our website in that way. And then lovely image also from Solihull, the next one, with what the council have done there. And just think what Solihull Council, can you imagine this, dare I say it, in Sutton at the moment, what they've done with these wonderful wildlife ways, as they called it. We put £2 million in, very happy to support it. The greening of the borough, incredible progress there. You get off the train at Solihull Station, it literally looks as though you've arrived at an alpine meadow. Beautiful work with one of our most dynamic councils. And then the last ingredient of it all, number 6, is of course retraining. As I said earlier on, lots of people have fallen out of work, so we will need to retrain them in the growth sectors of the future. And just a few ideas there. This first one I really love. This is unique to the West Midlands. It's actually taking the apprenticeship levy from big companies and making it available to small companies through the transfer fund. Those big companies have all contributed. If you're running a big company, please do, because you can recruit apprentices in SMEs. So that's 2,000 jobs we've got down for that there. And then the next slide, please. Next slide. With particular sector-specific training courses. Wonderful that this picture was just taken 2 weeks ago in Wolverhampton with the Tesla electric vehicle. Think I've talked about electrification of automotive. This is one end of the whole chain here. This is to train mechanics of electric vehicles. 700 training places on offer from Wolverhampton College in that brand new sector that we have funded. And then retraining for the most dynamic part of business, Jess, is of course in digital with the boot camps that we're doing. £6.5 million we've got to concentrate on this. And the great thing is nearly everybody who's gone through one of these boot camps gets a good job at the end. Such is the vibrancy of the digital sector. And then lastly, of course, for the retraining for young people, the Kickstart scheme, a government scheme, not a regional scheme, but this was outside Tesco in Spring Hill, where they've been actually the West Midlands leaders, and the national HR director, by the way, on the right-hand side of that film, she wouldn't mind me saying she's a Suttonian resident. So great that Tesco have led the way with that Kickstart. We're looking for 20,000 young people to go into those opportunities across the West Midlands. Last reflections then. Last reflections. We've got to fight for the region. There is an enormous amount to be done. Enormous amount to do. We've got to bring in a lot of money to do all of these things. So far, £3.3 billion and counting is what we've brought into the West Midlands through the Combined Authority since the formation of the Combined Authority and the Mayoralty. Split pre and post COVID there, and we need to. And actually, that's got to be updated for the budget. So we are doing well. And last thought for businesses, click again, really important one. No single penny on business rate supplement for businesses. We are by law able to do that, but we have not done it. We just feel that at the moment, businesses are so stretched. We have not put any supplement. So we've tried to bring that cash in to invest in everything we've talked about from elsewhere. That's all I wanted to say, Chris. Thank you very much for listening. Very happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Andy. That was fantastic. As Andy says, we're open to any questions. So if you could put them into the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. So I've got a couple of questions to kick us off, Andy, if that's okay.
Of course.
So the first one then, so how will the West Midlands Combined Authority be supporting the return to work in our offices, not only in the town centre, but across the outlying smaller areas like Boldmere, Wild Green, Minworth, etc.?
So you might think this is an odd answer, but the most important thing we've got to do directly is run our public transport safely. But I mean, think how many people commute to work by public transport, and we have got to get that to restore confidence of the public in our public transport. So that's probably the single biggest immediate direct thing I have to do. And actually, I think we've done a really good job during the pandemic. It's continued to run pretty much full timetable, and it is clean and there is social distancing. But we will need to change from the national message of stay away from public transport, frankly, to use it in a safe way going forward. And I suspect, going on a little bit more broadly, what we'll also be doing is some form of marketing advertising campaign about let's get back to our town centres, our city centres, and actually, as you say, our more local centres as well. And interestingly, I feel the local centres have done reasonably well through the pandemic, actually. I suspect they've had a better time than the town centres, actually. But there's two, and we haven't agreed how we're doing this regional return to work campaign yet, but there will be one, and I'm looking forward to it, actually.
That's brilliant, thank you. So there's quite a lot of different issues, I think, that people want to discuss in the sort of questions we're getting through. So I'm going to try and put them into little clusters of theme, if you like. So one of the next questions is about the developments in Minworth and Pedimore, the Pedimore developments. So how important do you feel that is to the town of Sutton Coldfield as it starts to be developed in the next couple of years?
So there's two different answers to this. And I need to be honest, I would not have given permission for the Greenbelt housing development. I just think that was wrong. And I think it's very important that we work harder on brownfield developments. And when I say brownfield, just let me make people think a bit. I don't literally necessarily mean a completely derelict site. We've got lots of those across the Black Country and in Birmingham, and we've been developing them as fast as they can. But what is going to have to happen is we are going to have to think about redeveloping some of our existing urban areas. And actually in the town centre, that definitely applies. And that will be good for town centres to bring more people living in them, more spending power. And actually part of the town council's master plan is to do that, to invest in our town centre. So that I've got a huge question mark over. But to be clear, on the commercial sites, the Pedimore estate, I think that is important because actually we are going to need real quality, probably green industrial employers. And IM Properties, who own that, have a really important obligation to bring someone in, or plural, in to be really distinct and cutting edge employers there. So I am supportive of that sort of green industrial prospectus as IM put to the market. And they're tantalizing us that they're very near to landing their first tenant, which will be really very interesting. Because although, let's be honest, employment rates in Sutton are much higher than other areas of Birmingham. It's a huge success story, even in Sutton, and certainly in the rest of the conurbation, we need those new high quality employers.
Excellent, thank you. So a couple of the questions that are coming in now are related to the town centre.
Yes.
And the regeneration in the town centre. So if I first take a question from Katie Hale, so former president of the Sutton Chamber.
Yeah.
Katie asks, Sutton Coldfield has to compete with Solihull and Birmingham in terms of being a place for people to work and live and invest. What do you view as the USP as a town and how we can differentiate to prosper?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Katie, I wouldn't be worried about thinking you compete with Birmingham and Solihull, because of course, if I'm really blunt, the way you lost out to Solihull over the last 20 years was in the retail race, where, let's be honest, Solihull Council did a really good job with the Touchwood development. And we know for a fact that people who might otherwise be in the Sutton catchment probably go to Solihull. But town centres are not all going to be about retail going forward. So in a sense, this is an opportunity for you. And to come right to your question, the USP is you have got an incredibly affluent, discerning catchment of really high spending potential. So the town centre in redevelopment has got to think, how does it provide what that catchment needs? And at the moment, too much of the spending is going out of the town. Now, that some of the answer to that will be retail, but it won't be the sort of chain stores that have been so successful in either Birmingham city centre or Solihull historically. A lot more of it might be local retail. I was talking, that's definitely one of the real drivers of the pandemic. There will definitely be the question of what leisure, and I would again say, what do people in Sutton really want to do? What new forms of leisure are there going to be in the town centre? And I would definitely talk about the type of housing that could come into the town centre. And this whole notion, the jargon is this 15-minute neighbourhood where everything is there in an immediate locality. You don't necessarily need the car. It can all be very sustainable. Sutton has got a brilliant opportunity to provide that 15-minute neighbourhood in the way in which the city centre will find it more difficult just because of the scale. So I think you genuinely can plan your town centre in the light of all the changes that have occurred to the market. And actually this means it's a good opportunity for you to think differently, not fight Solihull on what they did 20 years ago, basically.
That's brilliant. Excellent. So a question from Naeem Arif, who is the Vice President of the Sutton Chamber.
Of course.
In his opinion, the key to the success of the town centre regen is getting a few brands in there that will make it compelling for people to go into Sutton. With your connections in retail and hospitality, is this something you can help to influence?
I don't think you, well, I think my previous answer makes you think maybe we need to move on a bit from retail brands. I honestly do not believe the most successful high streets will be the ones that have all the brands we always knew, Naeem. That's in a sense slightly old fashioned. And it does, to the previous question though, Katie, it doesn't give you a USP. I would be much, much keener to see what are the local businesses that bring about a brilliant concoction, especially for Sutton, or maybe some national businesses that got a small number of outputs. I mean, you'll think this is a small example, but it really stuck with me. I went into the wonderful electric bike shop on Sutton, just the sort of Birmingham end of the town centre a few weeks ago, and I think they only have one outlet in the West Midlands, or maybe two, maybe one in Solihull as well. And I was really struck by the huge success they were having. And that's what we've got to think about. What are the new, unique things, not what are the brands that have been on our high street for the last 20 years and are probably already overexposed. They are all shrinking down, basically, and the market isn't going to suddenly revive them. So I want to think differently. Now, there is an interesting question, though, about hospitality. There is absolutely no question. Come back to the spending power in Sutton I mentioned earlier on. Sutton Town Centre should have a really good choice, a really good choice of top-end hospitality brands. Some of them might have a small number of national outlets. Some of them might be unique local companies, but that's how we've got to think. Sutton cannot be the same as Erdington High Street and Solihull High Street and Sheldon and everywhere else. It's got to think, what's our market? Let's do something different.
Thank you very much. So a question from Anne-Marie Simpson. The regeneration plan for Sutton is a fantastic asset for the town, and its initiation will be much awaited. Until we can look to see how development opportunities being promoted, until we can look to see development opportunities being promoted, can we look to Birmingham City Council and partners progressing short-term and meanwhile initiatives to help? I'm sure that is that supposed to say medium-term initiatives.
No, meanwhile, I know what it means. I know what it means.
What do you do?
You should be able to. So your city council should be working with you. I mean, to be very honest, it's why we want to launch the bike scheme in Sutton. This was something the WMCA was responsible for, not Birmingham. And why did we bring it? Because we wanted to bring a bit of interest to the parade, frankly, and bring people into the town. But you should be saying to the city council, right, what can you do to begin it wouldn't be beyond us to improve the hoardings with some brandings, to open up some of the space for meanwhile uses. I absolutely agree with you. It's also, of course, why it's important that we do our work on the public transport interchange, because if you change the public transport, you can change the whole public realm. and that too can make it feel an altogether different place. Probably greening would be my big emphasis on it as well. We know how Suttonians love their park. Well, why is the town centre such a concrete piece? So there's opportunities for greening there as well. So there should definitely be some interim pieces. If I'm very honest, I would look to your town council though for the most intelligent immediate actions around that.
Thanks, Andy. So a question from Angela Lawler, which is still in the theme of the town centre. How can we encourage the town centre landlords to reduce their rents to attract individual retailers?
This is a really, really difficult question, which is far from unique to Sutton. This is endemic across the whole country because the landlords stick with the same, even if they have a vacancy, they stick with the same notional rent in their balance sheets, and therefore they don't have to devalue their properties. And they are very, very reluctant. But the only way is a conversation with them which goes, if you do that, you will bring in new tenants. And as a consequence of that, you will drive the vibrancy of the whole town centre, and therefore you will rent out more of your current vacant units. That's the virtuous circle you have to break into. But it is fiendishly difficult to get some retail landlords to see that. That is the conversation that has to occur, though. That's the persuasion that has to occur. And I have said, actually, if there's a feeling that I could help in any of these conversations from my background experience, I am more than happy to do that. And it's a strange link, but I think you might have seen some of the stuff in the media about my role with Coventry City Football Club, where I used my previous experience to bring two sides of the negotiation together, and lo and behold, they're going back to play at the Rico. It's a classic example of nothing to do with the mayor's job, but using some previous experience, and I would be up for that in the whole issue of Sutton retail rents as well.
Okay, I think this final question around the town centre, and it's a follow-up from Anne-Marie, and it's probably more of a statement than a question, saying, I asked Sutton Bid when I was on the board if we could incorporate pop-up sheds to support independence and interesting things that attract footfall. We were advised by BCC that they wouldn't support this. And she also said, hello, Andy, on the question as well.
Thank you. Well, that's the point, really, isn't it? I shan't indulge in naked politics, but that is the point, that your town council, and let me just say one last thing on this. When it was 2 summers ago, actually, summer 19, Andrew Mitchell, myself and Simon Wardley, Town Council, did a survey with Sutton residents about issues, and it could have been about education, it could have been about jobs, it could have been about health services. This issue of the town centre was overwhelmingly the biggest issue. And the reason I'm really optimistic about this is lots of people tried to stick sticking plaster on this, but in response to that survey, what the town council have done is a really thoughtful, proper master plan. And what we've got to do is we'll take a bit of time, take our time to fulfill that plan, because it's only by something pretty bold like they've done we will get the changes we want. So I'm full of admiration for how Simon and his team have thought about that. And as I've said before, I'm up for being a project sponsor of it and supporting it.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. So I want to move the questions along the line of education a bit more now. So as the Sutton Chamber, we've been pushing hard within one of our subcommittees around the next generation. And with the support of Alex, Councillor from Birmingham City Council, we've reinvigorated the Sutton Coldfield Youth Council.
Yes.
We've been going extremely well and been putting on events with different speakers and trying to engage more with the school population. And I've got a question here from Kay Burton Williams, who works for BMET College.
Yeah.
So we have a large student population. What is being put into place so they are being encouraged to spend and stay in the town centre rather than just passing through?
So they're encouraged to spend in the town centre. Actually, Kay, for once in my life, I can't think of an answer to that question. I think, I mean, in a sense, it goes back to the previous question, doesn't it? We need all of the business in the town centre to be vibrant, and therefore to be attractive to students spending their income there. But I can't say we're doing a particular thing. I thought where your question was going is what we're going to do about jobs for your students, where of course we've got a whole litany of stuff I've already told you about. But I'm not going to make it up. There isn't a particular plan for students spending in the town. However, let's be honest, what we always see, and it's not far to walk from your college back into the town centre, is it? What we always see, if businesses sort of smell out the student pound, they will accommodate that. It doesn't, in a sense, need us there. But it's a fascinating thought, though, Kay. You're making me think out loud, actually. When I said earlier on, what's the spending power in Sutton? Why isn't it turning its mind to that? This is another huge spending power. You're right. So why aren't they walking into town at lunchtime to have that experience, or indeed spending time there in the evening before they then get public transport home and spending? So there is an opportunity. I think, right, point taken. It's one we need to think more about, incorporate.
So just final question on education then. So Sutton's got a great educational heritage with some great schools,
Yeah.
the college.
Yeah.
So how important is the next generation in your broader thinking?
I'm reaching for my exhibit A. So the answer is nothing is more important. And my exhibit is the mayoral jobs plan, what I said, getting the West Midlands back to work. And we have particularly talked in it about the challenge that young people face in terms of getting roles. And all I would say is there is a vast amount of retraining that is being put together. So whether that's with our colleges, and the previous question will know about this, the sector-based work academies, we call it, all of the growth sectors working with our colleges across the West Midlands to provide the training programs for those new sectors. I chose the Wolverhampton example around electric vehicle maintenance. We could have chosen things in construction, in digital, in health. BMET do brilliant work in that health growth area, actually. So there's enormous amount there. The other thing I would, of course, talk about is the work that is being done. Someone put up on here, the digital boot camps. That is a critical sector as well for getting people back. And as I said, 6.5 million, huge response there. So I guess the last thing I'd say on it is, if you want to see how this is all pulled together in one place, go look at what we call a youth platform. This is new in response to the pandemic, and we've done it in every borough to say, if you want one place where all the support services for young people are there, whether it be apprentices, whether it be training courses, whether it be Kickstart, whether it be the youth coaches in DWP, all there in one place, just go onto the WMCA website under youth platform and you'll see it's all there.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. So I've got about 6 questions left from various people, and we've only got about 6 minutes of your time.
All right, I can be brief.
So yeah, if we try and condense the answers, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to cover a few topics off here. So this question's from David Mellon. Do we have an identity problem at a national level across the region? And even Sutton is not so often recognised for its quality of life. What can we do to influence the national media with its London/Manchester bias?
I don't think we have a reputational problem, if that was the word. I don't actually. And I think if you look at the investments that have come into the West Midlands recently, our slide, that would probably say that. But you are right in what lies behind the question is the BBC, who remain the biggest spender by a country mile, spend a vast proportion of their total commissioning expenditure in the M25. That they don't is in Manchester or the devolved nations, and we have just 2% in the Midlands. It's not good enough. It hasn't been good enough for a very long time. I am optimistic that later this week you will see an announcement that begins to move that forward. It has definitely been something that's gnawed away at me, because in that sense the question's right. There is not enough life of Birmingham and the West Midlands portrayed on the BBC because not enough of the programming is made here. We needed a film studio. That's why Stephen Knight was so important. We can then get more portrayal. So watch this space. Great question.
Thanks, Andy. So again, short answers if you can, just so we can squeeze everybody in.
Yeah, that's all right.
So a quick question from Mark Tonks. Andy, regarding the Gigafactory, you mentioned last week in the Q&A with Paul Faulkner, you were looking at getting an investor and partner with a Chinese manufacturer. Mark's asked, why Chinese? Do we not have the technology and workforce here in the Midlands to build our own, or is it a cost-based issue?
Fascinating question. Most of the existing big battery companies are Chinese, not exclusively though, Mark. So it could be a Korean company, Samsung. It could be a Japanese company, but the likelihood is it will be a Chinese company. Now, do not despair though. about that means it's not made in the UK. That might be Chinese, that heart of it, but it sits in the middle of a big supply chain, everything from our universities to our electric vehicle charging. And that, a lot of that would be made in the Midlands. So, you know, you're right. It galls me that we haven't got a battery supplier, but we haven't at the moment. And that they need to come, and if it's not a pun, they need to sort of put the electrodes on the rest of the industry. And a lot of that can still be made in the UK.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. So I've got two questions here. One's from someone who's put their name as 10 in the description. So I'm not quite sure who 10 is, but thanks for joining us, 10. And Katie Hale's asking a very similar questions. This is about electric vehicles and the infrastructure around electric vehicles. Maybe if you could just tell us a bit more about any plans you have around electric vehicles.
Well, it's not good enough, is it? So we're busy. The government said no more petrol cars sold after 2030. We're busy trying to electrify the manufacturers. And just remember this one stat, by the way, Phil. JLR said they're, as our biggest company in the West Midlands, said they're moving to electric vehicles, and they said they put £2.5 billion a year into this. That would easily make them the biggest industrial investor in the UK. I mean, it's a vast commitment. But where the question is going is, what about the electric vehicle charging infrastructure? It's not good enough. So what we've got to do is try to win the cash from central government that has been put there in something called the Office of Low Emission Vehicles, OLEV, and combine it with private sector cash to build a network of rapid chargers. We have the proposal, we're trying to win support for it. We know it's got to be done. And you're right to call us and frankly the government out on not having moved faster on this, because they've got the stick of the ban around 2030. They've not got the carrot of encouraging the charging infrastructure. And that's what we're trying to address. Brilliant,
thank you. So I've got two questions left. So first one, which is still on the sort of topic of transport. So this is from Nigel Waldron, sort of ex-president of the Chamber.
Know him well. Good afternoon, Nigel.
So how do you propose to encourage people to go back into the city centre for food and retail? Have you considered delaying the clean air charge until the city centre gets back on its feet?
Nigel, well, I said a little bit about this earlier. Make sure we run a really good public transport system, as I think we have. We'll have to think about the marketing as well. But the straight answer to your question is, as I think you know, I am not responsible for the clean air zone. That is a city council decision, and they are determined to go ahead. You will know that I have long argued that it's extremely questionable whether it should be 24/7. The nighttime economy could be supported if there was some London-like finesse to that as well. So the straight answer to the question is the City Council are being determined to press on with that introduction. Full plan on the 1st of June.
Thank you. So final question from me then today. So this actually come from Katie Hale again, another former president. So it's a president.
Gosh, you get through them quickly, you're president.
So Katie says she'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the changes proposed in Sutton Park in preparation for the Commonwealth Games.
Oh, yes.
Seems to be a bit of resistance to change, and she feels we desperately need to evolve.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Of course I agree. We've got to back the Commonwealth Games. Let's say I was the one there sitting in Theresa May's office saying, you will support this, Prime Minister, and of course she did. So I'm not in any way going to step back from that, because as I said in my presentation, if it was important in 2017, it's even more important now that we've got it. However, Sutton Park is it's brilliant that it's going to be used as a Commonwealth Games venue, and I'm actually really pleased that we've got events. They're not just in Birmingham, they're literally from Cannock to Leamington across the whole of the region, so it's a regional celebration. But Sutton Park is, a very special, cherished place, and I think the thought is that what is proposed as infrastructure is inconsistent with the setting it's sitting in, and that does have to be properly considered. So yeah, of course we've got to invest, make changes, enable us to host a brilliant thing, but it can't be at the expense of some form of consistency with the setting that it's sitting in. So I hope that a way forward can be found, that yeah, we've managed to put on a brilliant event, but without doing something we will feel isn't in keeping with the beautiful setting.
Thank you, Andy. That was fantastic. Some great answers. It's good to be able to ask all those questions to you. So I think you might have to leave us now. So I'm going to hand back over to Chris to wrap things up, and hopefully our delegates can meet us for a discussion afterwards. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Phil. Your timing is impeccable.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Andy. I know you've got a taxi to jump in, I think, that's waiting outside for your next engagement.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, guys. Really good. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, so thank you to Andy as he just leaves us for the afternoon. But yeah, Phil, thank you for your hosting on the Q&A side as well. And I think some really interesting questions and some areas of support and areas of discussion to be looked at. And thank you for all those great questions. Just a few final things from us. Yes, there is a breakout room that we'll be asking people to go into off this call, but onto another call. Our chamber host Jess has just put that into the chat room. It is in the email that was sent as well for the event itself. So we'll leave you all for a few minutes just to have a comfort break, get yourself a cup of coffee, and by all means do join us at 3 o'clock for the sort of breakout room. We'll have myself and Phil, we'll sort of talk about some of those areas and obviously give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. We want to try and create a similar thing to we'd have an in-person event when we all discuss some of those areas brought up by Andy. But appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. If you have got any further questions, I know Gary Phelps, one of Andy's sort of PR representatives, is on the call. Please do send it over to myself and to Phil, and we will sort of pass on your feedback around the local area. It's great to have had Andy's time for an hour. It's even more important that we continue to hold him to account and hold his organisations to account to make sure that they are doing the best for Sutton Coldfield alongside our town council, our businesses and our local community as well. So a huge thank you for everyone attending this afternoon. We will see you in a few minutes on the other link. As I said, it is in the email. Thanks to Phil, and we'll see you in a moment. Thank you, everybody.